Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce, Ukraine war news update, second part thereof for the 8th of February 2025. This is a military aid update video, and I'm actually going to talk first of all about something I just mentioned in the previous hits and losses video concerning a strike on Seledowe, but it is pertinent to military aid and equipment. So this airstrike on the Russian underground bunker of the 35th Russian Brigade in Seledowe, which apparently wiped out the entire command, and this is coming from the Russians themselves. As stated by sources associated with the Ukrainian military aviation, the strike was carried out with the help of 2,000 pound, that's 900 kilogram bombs. If so, this will be the first publicly known case. Just several days ago, it became known that 1,000 pound JDAM ERs are also actively being used by Ukrainian aviation when the video of the airstrike by a Ukrainian Su-27 was released. The airstrike on a Russian underground bunker, the 35th Russian Brigade in Seledowe, photo from the ground. The first to report about the attack on the headquarters of the 35th Brigade were the Russians themselves yesterday. Only they assumed that the attack was carried out by the help of HIMARS. So this is really, really significant, and we could now be seeing the use of much larger, much more capable, or at least destructive, guided glide bombs or bombs. We don't know the exact details here. But that could be really good news for the Ukrainians, and especially as they're getting, as each week, month goes on, they're getting more aircraft. So hopefully they're getting, we've heard just recently they picked up more of the Dutch F-16s. They've also had several consignments of F-16s already, and then they've got the Mirages coming online as well. So this all could be quite good news for the Ukrainians for the front line if these planes can be used on the front lines, or at least that's a Su-27 being used. It could be that they're able to push some of the older Soviet aircraft further forward, with the other aircraft doing the jobs that some of those Sukhois might have previously been doing further back, or whatever. They will have, I hope, more options with the added airframes. Right. Ukraine is expecting important decisions at the Ramstein meeting. That's a Ukraine defense contact group. About 50 nations can be present there. The UK is taking the lead in organising, or I guess comparing the meeting. Ukraine is actively preparing and expects important decisions to be made at the upcoming Ramstein meeting. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Tiki has said at a press conference yesterday. It's going to be interesting to see what is mentioned, and it's going to be interesting to see what the Americans do. There will be an American presence there. Pete Hegseth, I think, will be there. Europe-wide, ahead of Ramstein, leaders need to collectively agree, and Trump says, this particular commenter, all nations significantly increase GDP defense spending, so that's in line with the kind of NATO and what the US want, actually. Increase direct financial aid for domestic Ukrainian munition production, speed up the NATO and EU accession timetables, and increase energy sanctions. So hopefully if that can happen, that's good. And it seems to be something that the EU is very much behind. I played you a speech two speeches, one by Ursula von der Leyen and one by Kaja Kallas to the EU ambassadors, with a new mandate for their leadership just starting now. Here we have another speech by Ursula von der Leyen. Is it because of the Polish being now having that rotating presidency of the EU? Anyway, let's listen to Ursula von der Leyen again.
This new political cycle marks the start of a new era in European defense. Over the 3 years of Putin's war, we have ramped up our military production, but it's not enough. We have to do more.
Good.
More than ever, we have to spend more, we have to spend better, and we have to spend together. Because Europe needs a surge in defense.
So if you're thinking about what the US is doing at the moment in receding from Europe and not being too bothered about the security, energy, and well, you could include energy security, but national and international security in Europe, then this is exactly what you want to hear, because Europe has to step into that vacuum where I was listening to Adam Kinzinger and Phillips O'Brien in a fascinating discussion. Go and check it out on Phillips O'Brien's Substack. The video there, these two talking about how, you know, potentially Europe has atrophied over the last sort of 70 years, and not because Europe's at fault there, but because actually the US came in and took the lead because of the Cold War, right? The US came in, took the lead and said, right, we're going to have bases in Germany and over Europe, and this is all because it's in our best interest, as in the US's best interest, that that Europe is stable and it's secure and it's doing what we want to do. So we're going to take a lead in Europe. We're going to take a lead with NATO, and NATO is going to be our puppy, and we're going to be pulling the strings. So the US has been pulling the strings for the last 70 years, and as a result, Europe has kind of sat back and not really done an awful lot. But I'm not one to blame them for that. It's just what you're going to do. Okay, well, you're taking control over security, you know, international arms races and international conflict is kind of a thing between these two Cold War entities, and Europe is kind of playing this bit part, but then over time just spends less on defence and more on other things that they need to their welfare states and whatnot to have their countries fully functioning. The US then gets used to an economy where they're spending, at the moment, almost $900 billion a year. But that's kind of their industrial strategy together with their defense strategy, together with their foreign policy strategy. And after 70 years, you make that work. So that becomes part of how your economy functions. And then it gets to this point where they turn around to Europe and say, well, you guys aren't doing enough. And Europe's like, no, we're not doing enough because you were doing everything and that's what you wanted. So, you know, kind of don't blame us when you were taking control, and the US is going, well, don't blame us when you didn't do enough. And so everyone's kind of blaming each other. It's just the simple situation is the Americans were taking the lead and now they don't want to take the lead. And so, you know, whoever you want to blame, the reality is Europe has to step up. So the question is, will they step up? The political rhetoric is there, and the understanding in a lot of the leadership within the European Union is there, and within a lot of these countries. So that's really good news. It looks like Europe will step into this vacuum, and I think the US will step back from international affairs, and they will lose out in the kind of 4D chess game of global hegemony. And it appears that everything the US is doing at the moment is to the benefit of China and Russia. It seems amply apparent. So I think the US is going to lose out there. The EU will have to step up. And then the question is, in the individual countries, are they willing to spend that money? So the EU can probably afford to spend that money. I don't know the finance of the EU, but I assume that they've been taking in vast amounts of money over time and building up a pot of money, like almost like a sovereign wealth fund type thing. I don't know how they keep their money, but I assume the EU's got enough money stashed somewhere to be able to do this from an EU point of view. The question is, can individual countries, as I say, do that? So, for example, you know, France wants to spend almost double on defence. Okay, but will they get that through government? Well, you know, I think there's a recognition from the people at the top about what needs to be done, but convincing your populations that this needs to be done and spending the money on that, those are two very different things. So I think the rhetoric from Europe is there, the political acknowledgement is there, the strategic understanding is there, but the ability to pass that through individual parliaments is the big challenge. And I guess we'll have to wait to see how that pans out.
Modern warfare requires scale, technology, coordination, too big for any one of our member states.
True.
But this is where joining forces, European cooperation, delivers. This new political cycle.
So I guess we'll have to see how that pans out. What I think the EU or Europe or European nations will need to do, and I think this will be helped by a European strategic and industrial strategy, strategic strategy, European political, industrial, and defence strategy. That's what I mean. if you can tie all these things together, then you can be a bit more like the US has been, which is embedding defense spending within your industrial strategy and your geopolitical strategy. So I think, it might be a bit painful to begin with, but then, and I don't really want to advocate for the military industrial complex, but actually that's what needs to be brought to the forefront in Europe, so that Europe is independent of the US in terms of both industry and defense and, security. Hopefully that all makes sense. I'm just waffling really. Now, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development plans to invest at least 1.5 billion euros in Ukraine in 2025, according to the EBRD president, Udli Runobaso. The priority is to support business and the energy sector, which has suffered from Russian attacks. After the war, the bank is ready to increase investments to 3 billion euros per year. Good stuff there, but hopefully, that's not just charity. That will be investment in Ukraine, and obviously they would want a return on that investment. Now, Bulgaria has been giving a bunch of equipment over recent months to Ukraine. Ukraine has received, I think, 100 of these older APCs and other things from Bulgaria. They've received an awful lot of artillery ammunition and whatnot, Soviet era stuff from Bulgaria that still either had them in storage or is manufacturing them. So Bulgaria is being super important, but they are getting compensated, for example, from Denmark, among others, for the transfer of that equipment. Indeed, it's, I think, $519 million, is it? 500 million euros for Ukraine's military aid in reimbursements. Sofia, so that's the capital of Bulgaria, received substantial compensation from Western allies for providing Soviet-era military equipment and ammunition to support Ukraine's defense efforts. And Bulgaria have come out and said, look, I'm paraphrasing here, but something like, it's advantageous to help Ukraine for us as well. Everyone wins here type thing. Now, this is fascinating. So Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Syrski, said, we agreed with the Commander-in-Chief of the Swedish Armed Forces to continue the dialogue on supporting Ukraine's Air Force, including the possible provision of Swedish-made fighter jets. This is good. Bring on the Gripen. That appears to still be on the cards. There have been hints about this. I'm hoping that there's a lot more going on behind the scenes, such as training of pilots, and then suddenly you might see Gripens flying in the skies above Ukraine and go, oh, right, no, it's happening. We've heard that Sweden put together an aid package that included forethought of spare parts and stuff for Gripens, just in case, you're not going to be spending that much money unless you're pretty certain that Ukraine are going to get Gripens, right? So I'm fairly confident they're going to get Gripens. The question is, at what stage of that process are we at? And I just don't know. Now, UK leaks development of Snapper. I don't know if that's the right word, but anyway, no report says UK leaks development of Snapper and Wasp naval drones for Ukraine. These new UMVs, unmanned vehicles, USVs really, rapidly developed to aid Kiev, are undergoing final testing. Ukraine's maritime drones have already dealt heavy blows to Russia's fleet. Now, the UK has been busily getting on with supporting Ukraine in a number of ways. Like I've said to you before, hinted that the UK is doing an awful lot more than most of us realise in terms of personnel inside Ukraine, bases and things going on there that are I think, evidence that the UK is taking the Russian threat very, very seriously indeed. So, it's no surprise to me that the UK is taking the front role in terms of Ramstein as the Americans recede. Indeed, I don't want to be all like jingoistic here, but I kind of like this idea, and I think this is possibly exactly correct. So Artois says, genuinely love how the UK is just continuing to quietly innovate and develop solutions to help Ukraine, and no one really feels the need to shout about it. So although this is kind of shouting about it now, and you can argue as a leak, it isn't like a leak like you'd think. So let's go and actually look at this. So UK, it says, leaks development of Snapper and Wasp naval drones. But let's go into actually what happened. So the UK appears to be helping to develop 2 uncrewed maritime vessels, UMVs, for use by Ukrainian forces, which have achieved notable successes against Russian naval assets in the Black Sea through the use of UMVs functioning as one-way attack munitions. Revealed in a pair of UK parliamentary written responses, so it's not like they're shouting about it here. There's just written in some responses that people have looked over and going, oh, okay. On the 4th of February 2025, UK Minister for Defence Procurement, Maria Eagle, made mention of Wasp and Snapper UMV programmes, which themselves were apparently referenced in an ADS annual dinner on the 28th of January by the UK Secretary of State for Defence, John Healey. Regarding Wasp and Snapper, so it's not like everyone's shouting about these, it's just quietly mentioned. And then here it's been picked up on by navaltechnology.com. So regarding the Wasp and Snapper UMVs, Eagle said both were, quote, a new uncrewed maritime system that had been, quote, rapidly developed specifically to support Ukraine. Quote, the system is currently undergoing final testing and further details will be set out in due course. So there's not a lot that we know about these, other than there are 2 new naval drones that are being developed in cooperation with the UK. And obviously we have a very strong maritime history and culture here. That's why we've taken the lead in the maritime coalition with Norway. And we're helping Ukraine out a great deal in terms of the Black Sea, in terms of grain initiatives, in terms of maritime insurance, and indeed with this kind of technology. Now, continuing drone testing news, successful testing of a new modification of the fastest interceptor, Sting, says Max24. The new versions of Wild Hornets fastest drones can now fly twice as long while maintaining their speed. I mean, this is incredible. What you really want from drones is, well, obviously, the faster the better, they're less likely to be intercepted, but range. Now, at 50% throttle, the drone reached a speed of 200 kilometers an hour at an altitude of 1,046 meters. Now, if it can do that and fly for twice as long at that speed, then that is absolutely fantastic. I'm yet to talk to the guy from Wild Hornets. I was in contact with them via WhatsApp, but I need to do that. They seem to be really successful, not-for-profit drone manufacturer in Ukraine. Speaking of drone innovation, here we have a water cooler, but it appears to be a big reel of fiber optic cable. This is a fiber optics ground drone that is using that same kind of technology, whereby you can't intercept these, or you can't interfere with the communication of controller to drone. And so that's good news there. Right, where are we? Talking about fiber optics. So Russia's unstoppable drones are no longer safe. And this is Kiev Post, saying Ukraine just intercepted a Russian fiber optic controlled FPV drone for the first time. On January the 30th, Ukraine's 414th Strike UAV battalion, known as Magyar's Birds. So this is his unit that is now become a battalion. Detected and destroyed a Russian fiber optic drone, a system once believed to be unstoppable. Using mobile radar technology, Ukrainian forces are now able to identify, track, and intercept these drones before they reach the targets. In this video, Kiev Post covers. Let's watch this Kiev Post video then.
In late January, Ukraine's 414th Unmanned Aerial Vehicle Strike Battalion, known as Magyar's Birds, achieved a breakthrough in counter-drone warfare. For the first time, Ukrainian forces successfully detected, intercepted, and destroyed a Russian fiber-optic-controlled FPV drone, a platform considered immune to electronic warfare. With all the developments in electronic warfare measures and countermeasures, we have now come full circle back to radar, which is what Ukraine used to defeat the Russian fiber-optic drone. Since late 2024, Russia has been deploying FPV drones controlled via fiber-optic cables. One such drone is believed to be the Russian Prince Vandal of Novgorod drone, recognizable by its large rear-mounted fiber-optic cable drum carrying a shaped charge warhead from a rocket-propelled grenade, commonly known as an RPG, as seen in the latest Ukrainian footage. Being a tethered drone, what it lacks in range and mobility, it makes up for with jamming resistance and enhanced control stability. They are nearly impossible to jam. Unlike traditional FPV drones that rely on radio signals, fiber optic drones use a physical cable connection, making them immune to electronic warfare jammings that disrupt the radio wavelengths. They provide high-resolution live video. The tethered connection ensures stable, high-quality imagery, allowing operators to execute precision strikes. With these advantages, fiber optic FPV drones were being hailed as the future of drone warfare, until now. On January 28, 2025, Robert Brovdy, founder and commander of Ukraine's 414th Unmanned Aerial Vehicle Strike Battalion, posted a video demonstrating how his unit intercepted and destroyed a Russian fiber optic drone. Brovdy said radar was the key to intercepting these drones that are otherwise invisible to operators due to a lack of radio signals.
Ми просто трохи розклали спеціальні дрон-радари, які детектують FPV на оптоволокні. Якісно наразі вони то роблять на відстані 3-4 кілометри. А далі підіймається FPV.
Okay, so let's actually listen to what he says here. I'm going to turn off his sound and read what he says. We just deployed some special drone radars that detect FPVs via fiber optics. Right now, they work effectively at a range of 3 to 4 kilometers. Then an FPV interceptor takes off, catches up with the active drone, and triggers a controlled explosion. So essentially, this is all about just detecting these fiber optic drones effectively and then setting off a usual interceptor.
With an unspecified radar module, his unit sent out a drone to the detected location, which was then able to get a visual confirmation of the fiber optic drone before homing in and destroying the drone in the end. Following the interception, Brovdy has urged the Ukrainian military to deploy mobile radar units every 2 to 4 kilometers along the front line. This strategy would help Ukrainian FPV drone pilots detect and subsequently intercept Russian fiber optic UAVs before they reach their targets.
Obviously, the problem there is that those radars will have a radar footprint and they would be very susceptible to kind of anti-radiation kind of missiles or activity.
Brovdy did not disclose which radar system was used in the interception, but military analysts suggest it may be a microwave radar system with wavelengths optimized to detect small, slow-moving drones that do not emit radio frequencies. While these radars have a limited range, placing them closer to the front lines, as Brovdy suggests, would dramatically increase detection capabilities, making Russian fiber optic drones less effective. But more importantly, Brovdy inferred that the drone was intercepted using tools that his unit already possesses, meaning it might just be a matter of optimizing existing resources instead of reinventing the wheels. While this is a remarkable achievement for the Ukrainian military, some challenges remain. Russia could adapt its drone tactics. For example, more electronic warfare jamming equipment on the front, hindering Ukraine's use of conventional FPV drones to get a visual confirmation and interception. Ukraine's mobile radar network must be expanded. Deploying a dense, coordinated grid of radars will take time and resources. Drone race. Russia is scaling up its drone production, attempting to overwhelm Ukrainian defenses. But Ukraine has also been developing and deploying its own version of fiber optic drones, turning the war into not just a race for numbers, but a battle of innovations where one side must outwit the other. In Brovdy's example, outwitting the other side could include optimizing existing resources and equipment, which might be a potential answer for Ukraine as the future of foreign aid becomes uncertain. Innovation might not always mean creating new things, but improvising and adapting using what's available. Perhaps that's the lesson here.
Okay, so potentially, radars being able to acquire these targets, and then the idea that you can densely cover the front line with these radars. I don't know how realistic that would be. But then we hear from the commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces. Remember, I spoke to Dimko Zluktenko the other day, and he was from the Unmanned Systems. He was talking about Sukharevsky, the leader of that new forces brigade, I guess. Soon we'll have mobile fire groups with lasers that will shoot down the Shahed drones. So there has been some hints that the Ukrainians have developed their own laser capability. The UK has been talking about their own Dragonfire. I'm sure we're going to see fairly soon the use of this. In fact, it has been hinted at that there has been some success with laser technology already. Now, someone's talking to me about Ukrainian bonds the other day. I mentioned this yesterday, but those smart enough to buy Ukrainian bonds back in autumn made a fortune. So Ukrainian bonds are a way of funding Ukraine's expenditure, and you can talk about the ability to spend money on their own military-industrial defense complex is helped by bonds, and good stuff there. Now, NATO launches a counter glide bombs competition to find solutions to counter Russian glide bombs, completely as to be expected here. These are, but isn't it interesting? I mean, this is what you learn by looking at wars and even becoming deeply involved in the wars. You get the benefit of being able to make sure that your own armed forces are best able to cope with whatever is thrown their way in the event that they are involved in a war directly. So the US, for example, or NATO, for example, here is saying, right, we are playing a vital role in this war in Ukraine, and we know that Russia are being very, very effective with their use of fairly simple munitions, really. A dumb munition with an affixed GPS or GLONASS or whatever guidance system and some fins or wings has become a devastating weapon. What do we do about this? So they've launched a competition to see if anyone can come up with some good ideas. First of all, the Commission is interested in the means of detecting, physically intercepting or neutralizing these glided guide bombs. Now, we're going to go to, again, this is Luktenko here. We're going to go to Keith Kellogg. I misinterpreted what Luktenko was saying yesterday, and I got all excited because I thought this was Keith Kellogg, and this is why I had to pull my video yesterday, because I just got it wrong, and I don't like to do that. So I was like, I'm so glad that Trump officials are starting to officially state the truth. It wasn't that it was a myth that the US was provided $174 billion. So actually, Keith Kellogg has not disagreed with that. He's talking about this myth that all of that money will be in Ukraine. So basically, he's responding to when Zelensky said recently that, less than half of the money or the equipment has found its way to Ukraine. And this is more Keith Kellogg putting a corrective on Zelensky, actually, in the way that he frames it. So let's listen to what Keith Kellogg, the special envoy for Ukraine and Russia, says.
What is happening in Ukraine where he's claiming that he hasn't gotten half the money? It's a lot of money.
Well, Robert, we're kind of scratching our head, too. The United States of America, the American people, the citizens, have given Ukraine over $174 billion. And
so he's confirming that they have given $174 billion.
We have put inspector generals on the ground in Ukraine and here to track that money. So we have a pretty good accounting of where it's going. Now, would you have to step back and say, some of that money that's been authorized has actually been spent here in the United States to build up weapon systems that we're sending over there. So
a couple of things to note here, and this is quite good. Keith Kellogg is saying, look, we've got inspectors general who are giving us a good account of what's going on. So it's kind of putting to bed this idea that it's all disappearing, this money, which some right-wing disinformation news sources are spreading, the idea that there's all this corruption. They don't know where the money's being spent. You've got people like Donald Trump Jr. and Tucker Carlson. We don't know how the money's spent. Well, actually we do, because we've been tracking it really closely. So it's really good that Keith Kellogg is saying that. But he also goes on, he's just starting to talk about actually how a vast proportion of that money is spent within the United States. And so that money isn't going to end up in a bank in Ukraine. Exactly what I've said. So I'm really happy that he's saying this, and hopefully this gets through. This is on Newsmax, which is like Fox times 5. But this needs to get out to all the Fox audience and Newsmax audience. They need to understand that a lot of the money that the Americans have put towards Ukraine is being spent inside the US.
So if he thinks every $174 billion are sitting on the ground in a bank in Ukraine, well, of course we're going to backfill. Of course we're going to build up our stocks. And that's what we have to buy it here in the United States. So that happens.
What is happening?
So that's a myth. The myth that he's dispelling is that all this money ends up in Ukraine in a bank. It's exactly what I'm saying. I've said this. How many times have you heard me say it's not as if the US is sending a suitcase full of cash over to Zelensky and Zelensky spanks that on a yacht or puts it in a bank. Right, that's not what happens. They're spending that money. You get that. Congress approves that. You got, okay, we're going to spend $2 billion and we're going to spend it in the US, backfilling our own. And he talks about backfilling and everything as well in the interview. But it backfills your own stocks, and then you send out older stocks with a book value to Ukraine. But actually, it doesn't really have that value. It's been bought and paid for. The only value that would have is if you were going to sell it to someone else, but it's unlikely to happen, especially with that the very much the older weapons or the old ATACMs and whatnot. So rather than having to dismantle those weapons when they become obsolete, you can get them out to Ukraine, and then you claim that that's like, I don't know, $1 billion worth of X, Y, and Z, and actually it's not really $1 billion at all. Now, what you are spending money on is then backfilling, but what you're really doing is you are upgrading your own armed forces. So you're getting rid of this old stuff and you're buying in newer stuff, generally speaking. Not all the time. There's some like HIMARS missiles and Patriot missiles and systems that that is, you know, you're putting in USAI orders to defense contractors to actually produce some of this stuff new, but an awful lot of stuff is being claimed to be this amount of money, and it really isn't. And that sort of understanding needs to be widespread among the American population. But anyway, that's that. So I'd misinterpreted what Dimko was talking about as a myth there. And then we hear that North Korea is likely to start producing drones co-developed with Russia this year. According to NHK, the deal grants Pyongyang a Russian tech aid for mass drone production in exchange for North Korean troops fighting alongside Russia in Ukraine. So, swapping troops fighting in Ukraine. I mean, we've heard every single kind of exchange that you can possibly think of in terms of North Korea giving troops to Russia and Russia giving, what have we heard? We've heard hydrocarbons and energy, space tech, satellite tech, nuclear tech, aircraft tech, drone co-production and drone tech, flat out money. We've heard it all. It could be that North Korea has received all of that, or some of that, or a small fraction of that. Who knows? It won't be coming for free, though. North Korea will know how desperate Russia are for troops, and I'm sure they will try and command as high a price as possible from Russia. But the problem is, for global security, is you are giving a murderous dictator the ability and the knowledge to be able to conduct more modern warfare more destructively than they otherwise would have been able, and that is a problem for global security. But it seems that the rest of the world appears to be sleeping on a job when it comes to how to deal with North Korea and what Russia is doing with North Korea. So there you go. Anyway, that's my tuppence. Hopefully that was of use and interesting. Please like, subscribe and share. Sorry, I'm so close to dying slowly at any moment here. I'm not very well at all. Please forgive me. I keep having to pause and cough myself to an early grave. But anyway, as I say, I appreciate your support. I'm very close to 50,000 subscribers. Please help us out with that. That would be amazing. I want to get to 50,139 though. I was trying to do that by the 2nd of January because I like arbitrary numbers, and it never happened. So I failed in life. Oh well. Take care. Speak soon.